So this woman just posted a very explosive video online because she just found out that the men in her family, including her father, brother, and cousins, have been using their annual hunting trip as cover for cheating on their wives, including other shady behavior. The hunting trip falls right after her parents' anniversary every year, and she believes that the trip started as a bachelor party for her father, but never stopped. Apparently, it's been carrying on for years, operating under the motto, "What happens on the trip stays on the trip." The secrecy surrounding the trip has always felt very suspicious to her, but she didn't have proof about anything inappropriate until now. The breaking point comes when her now ex-husband attends the hunting trip with the men in her family for the first time. During the trip, he tries to cheat on her and she finds out. The fact that he felt comfortable enough to attempt infidelity the very first time he went on this trip with her family raises serious questions for her. And she wonders to herself, if he felt so at ease doing this, what must the rest of the men be up to on these trips? Girl, that is the question to ask here. She does not hold back her anger, saying she hopes the wives of the other men see her story because she believes there's a long history of unfaithful behavior during these hunting trips. She says that she didn't just discover her husband's betrayal recently. She found out about it years ago during Hurricane Harvey, while her in-laws were staying with her and her husband because their home had been flooded. During a late-night argument in their bedroom with her in-laws asleep in the living room, she found out that her husband had saved the name of the woman he tried to cheat with in his phone under the name of the town they had visited for the trip. When the phone rang and she saw the strange contact name, he lunged to grab it from her, but she was already suspicious. Waiting until he fell asleep, she crawled across the floor, grabbed the phone, and called the woman herself. The woman told her in detail about the men on the trip, revealing that not only did her husband not wear his wedding ring, but none of the men did, making it clear that this was a common practice among them. And the story doesn't end there. She brings up a particular friend in the group who she calls Roger. Roger is the scapegoat of the group. Whenever something inappropriate happens, the men blame it on him. Roger is rumored to be a swinger, and the group uses him as a cover for their own misdeeds. When her husband tried to explain his behavior, he claimed that he couldn't remember anything and that he was just with Roger the whole time, trying to deflect blame onto the scapegoat just like the rest of the group does. Despite her fury at the time, she didn't confront him further. With her in-laws still living in her home, she decided to move on from the situation for the moment. Years later, after her relationship had fully disintegrated, she reflects on how her family, who claimed to love her, watched her suffer through a toxic marriage without truly supporting her. Worse, she discovered that some of the men had been conspiring against her, spreading rumors that she was a drug addict and mentally unstable. Despite all of this, she fought back, divorcing her husband, getting custody of her children, without the help of her family. And now that that's all done, she's done being quiet. And now she's posting about the trip on social media so that all the wives and girlfriends see. I thought it was interesting that this topic just came up because I just did that video the other day about how men-exclusive groups are unsafe breeding grounds for toxic behavior. And in it, I talked about how, the men around P. Diddy, R. Kelly, and other famous men who are now convicted of these crimes are surrounded by a lot of men who are actively participating in that behavior while also enabling it. And this reminds me of a Reddit that I talked about in a video a long time ago. In this story, a 28-year-old man who has 5 children and works 50-hour weeks shared his dilemma with the boys' club at work. So his job scheduled a weekend fishing trip meant for team bonding, but he chose not to attend, despite his wife's encouragement to go and enjoy himself. And his decisions were based on several reasons. 1, he was prioritizing his wife's needs. Every Sunday, he ensures his wife, a stay-at-home mom who manages most of the household and childcare responsibilities, has some time to herself. He arranges for her to have treat-yourself appointments and shopping trips, ensuring she gets a break from their 5 kids. I love this guy. This weekly routine is important to him, and he doesn't want to disrupt it by leaving for the weekend. The second reason was because he had discomfort with the fishing trip. The trip was framed as a stag weekend, which raised red flags for him. It was to be held near a popular college vacation spot known for wild parties, and he didn't feel comfortable with that environment. He wasn't interested in spending the weekend drinking and fishing, especially if it had the potential for behaviors he didn't trust or align with. The third issue he had with the trip was workplace inclusivity. He recognized that the women in his office felt excluded by the fishing trip, which was seen as a male-dominated event. He wanted to address that imbalance and create a more inclusive option for everyone at work, including the women who didn't feel comfortable with the fishing trip. Something that the guy notes a little bit later in the comments is that the women in the office actually really enjoy fishing. They just really didn't like the guys that were going on that trip because of how they operated. So, because of these reasons, this guy proposed an alternative, a family friendly campout where coworkers could bring their spouses and children. The event would include lake activities like boating, water sports, and blow up inflatables, along with a cookout. He even planned to include accommodations for those without children, offering them time to relax on the lake or engage in more extreme activities. His regional manager was impressed with this idea and decided to cancel the original fishing trip, replacing it with the family campout as an annual event. As a result, the poster received a yearly bonus for planning the event, taking the task away from a coworker who previously organized the fishing trip. However, this decision didn't sit well with his coworkers. They began mocking him, calling him whipped, and accused him of ruining their chance for a child-free weekend of fun. They were upset that the stag weekend had been canceled in favor of what they saw as a babysitting event. Right, because when it's your own children, it's not called babysitting. It's called watching your children and spending time with them. But anyways, even though their wives were excited and sent positive feedback about the family campout, the male coworkers felt their traditional trip was unfairly replaced. So, feeling unsure about the backlash he received, the man turned to Reddit to ask if he was in the wrong. Essentially, he's wondering if he should have gone along with the fishing trip and prioritized his coworkers' wishes, or if he was right to prioritize his family and a more inclusive work environment. Now, I think that we can all agree that this guy was definitely in the right. And a lot of people gave him props for prioritizing his wife and the other women in the office, along with the wives of his coworkers. And a lot of people brought up the fact that the trip screamed of an HR nightmare. This situation highlights several key aspects of why boys' clubs or male dominated work cultures can be toxic, particularly in professional and social settings. Boys' clubs refer to environments where male bonding and activities are prioritized, often at the expense of inclusivity and respect for different perspectives. So let's talk about how these situations expose the toxic elements of that culture. So the original fishing trip catered primarily to male employees, reflecting a long-standing tradition of excluding women from certain work bonding activities. This exclusion wasn't overtly malicious, but was based on interests stereotypically associated with men, such as fishing and drinking. This fosters a sense of alienation from the women, reinforcing the idea that these activities, and by extension, the workplace culture, are not designed with them in mind. By dismissing the interests of the women in the office, the male-dominated culture perpetuates an environment where only certain perspectives matter, which is damaging to morale and inclusivity. The way the man in the story is treated by his coworkers for not wanting to participate reveals another toxic trait: pressure to conform to specific masculine behaviors and ideals. The fishing trip was described as a stag weekend near a college party destination, emphasizing drinking, partying, and a carefree attitude that devalues family and personal commitments. The expectation that all men would eagerly jump at the chance for this type of bonding demonstrates the narrow view of masculinity that the boys' club often promote. When the man chose not to go, his coworkers immediately labeled him as whipped, suggesting that he's overly controlled by his wife, who actually encouraged him to go on the trip in the first place. But this type of mockery reflects the toxic belief that prioritizing family, especially being attentive to a partner's needs, is somehow a sign of weakness or inferiority for men. It dismisses the idea that men can be equally invested in their families and still be respected in the workplace. Instead of being respected for his choices, the man is ridiculed by his peers. His decision to prioritize his wife's well-being and propose a family-friendly event was met with hostility, largely because it diverged from the traditional male-focused bonding event. This punishment for stepping outside the boys' club rules illustrates how toxic environments discourage individuality and enforce conformity. His coworkers' resentment also speaks to their desire to maintain a space where they can indulge in behaviors that might not align with family values or inclusivity. Their hostility demonstrates how toxic masculinity within boys' clubs can stifle diversity of thought and create a punitive culture where different viewpoints are not only unwelcome, but actively ridiculed. The original fishing trip wasn't just an opportunity for the men to bond. It was also about leaving behind family responsibilities. The man's suggestion for a family campout where coworkers could bring their spouses and children was met with anger because it introduced the concept of work-life integration. The toxic element here is the underlying assumption that work trips should be an escape from family life and that bringing families along would ruin the fun. This reinforces the idea that family obligations are a burden, especially for men, and that a real man would prefer to be away from his family for a carefree weekend. This type of environment can be damaging because it alienates employees who value work-life balance and also reinforces gender roles where men are expected to value independence and bachelor lifestyle fun over their commitments to their families. Instead of these guys appreciating that the new event could build stronger relationships across the company and include everybody, The male coworkers saw it as a personal attack on their way of bonding. This resistance shows how boys' clubs can inhibit growth and adaptability, fostering an insular mindset that resists anything perceived as a challenge to the status quo, which is why they gotta go. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment.